Excellencies, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to this thematic solution session, jointly organized by the three Rome-based agencies, IFAD, WFP, and FAO. But first of all, let me introduce myself again. I know that I spoke to the early session, but I'm Elder Da Costa. I'm the General Secretary of the G7+, a group of 20 post-conflict and fragile states from different regions, and I'll be a moderator for this session today. It is my real special pleasure to have the panelists with us this morning. We're very fortunate to have panelists from three Rome-based agencies and from Sudan, who will share with us their perspective on how to move from fragility to resilience and the role of South-South and triangular cooperation. May I thank each panelist for being here today from different regions, who represents the voice of real life in this forum, the Expo 2019. But first of all, let me contextualize why this session is so important. The three RBAs, or Rome-based agencies, as I mentioned early on, have complementary and distinctive mandates while working for the same target group, the rural poor in developing countries. However, none of the three RBAs focuses exclusively on fragile states. This is a history in the making. But all of them have prioritized and scaled up their work in those countries, because it is widely acknowledged that the most extreme forms of poverty and human hardships are to be found in fragile states and crisis situations. As we all know, most of studies point out that by 2030, 2/3 of the world's poor will be living in fragile states. The report from the OECD, the World Bank, ODI, and so on. Therefore, addressing the root causes of fragility by empowering the rural poor through improved access to finance, markets, assets, and inputs, as well as greater voice of representation, would help the notion of leaving no one behind. I hope that this session will encourage us to have an interactive discussion to find solutions and practical successful examples within the so-called South-South and Triangle cooperation, and also the fragile-to-fragile cooperation, which in some points, some other organizations, which is also Italy-based, the ILO, they also have come up with the fragile-to-fragile cooperation in their strategic documents and also in the operation. From the G7+ point of view, if I may, with the New Deal for Engagement in Fragile States launched in Busan in 2011, emphasized country-led ownership and country development initiatives led by the leaders of the countries themselves. And one of the peace-building and state-building goals launched in that time is about economic foundations, which is basically dealing with jobs, livelihoods, food security, and nutrition. Ladies and gentlemen, before I introduce each panelist, allow me to outline the format and mechanism of this session. There will be 2 rounds of questions to each panelist, and each panelist will have 5 minutes maximum in the intervention, and we'll have also intervention from the floor, and also some other agencies which we have already identified. I'd like to encourage my fellow members from G7+ countries. I see Togo here, Central African Republic. You will have the chance also to speak when it comes to the questions and answer. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further delay, let me introduce our first speaker from the right-hand side here, Ms. Dongxing Feng. She's the Deputy Director of Partnerships and South-South Cooperation Division from FAO. She has such an extreme track record in her past professional experience. But let me just read one sentence here, that she was working at the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences as a plant pathologist for 19 years, and also other leading role in the International Atomic Energy Agency, and so on. So without further ado, let me ask you the first question, and then I'll come and then from my right to the left, and then the next question I'll ask from the left to the right, yeah? And then I'll also pose this question to the audience. So Ms. Feng, if I may ask the first question, how does your organization, FAO, use the South-South triangular cooperation to address fragility, to foster resilience? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Da Costa. Good morning, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. So let me begin my talk on talking on the FAO's resilience strategy and corporate framework to support a sustainable peace in the context of the 2030 agenda. So according to the FAO's flagship report launched this year, the state of food security and nutrition in the world, the main cause of poverty is still conflict. And also the report also showed that the number of undernourished people in 2000 has been well increased from 840 million in 2016 to 821 million in 2017. So those information demonstrated that we still have a long way to go in fighting hunger, and the resilience is the key to address this challenge. So, and that is why the resilience is the major components of the 2030 agenda, and also the several SDGs has the component or has the targets related to addressing fragility to address the problem. So as one of the leading UN agency in agriculture, food, and rural development, FAO's program or activities to addressing fragility and fostering resilience are at the core of the organization's work. In fact, one of the thematic area increase the resilience of livelihood to stress and criticism is one of the 5 strategic objectives of the organization. So in 2005, 25% of the countries under the support by the strategic objective 5 in the organization is to increase the resilience related to the conflict. And in 2016, FAO's ongoing project in 15 most resilient or fragile countries in the world were valued at $212 million. So for example, FAO is working together with a number of partners in developing countries, including Yemen, DR Congo, Somalia, South Sudan, Colombia, and Syria. So in the case of Syria, in fact, even during the conflict, FAO is working in 16 out of 14 provinces in Syria with the improved seeds supported by the FAO project. The Syria farmers produced 2.4 million tons of wheat. It's around 60% of the pre-conflict average. So how FAO use SSC as a tool in fostering resilience? So FAO, there is a knowledge sharing platform developed by FAO. So this is a platform that provides a very rich information on tools, methodologies, or analysis in the resilience. So this platform played an important role in fostering resilience. For example, FAO facilitated the South-South cooperation exchange between Cuba, Haiti, and Dominican Republic. So with the variety of exchange tools, for example, study tour or workshops, the two countries benefited a lot greatly from the advanced knowledge from Cuba in the area of classical swan fever. So those kind of, apart from this achievements, in fact, this initiative also helped the bilateral collaboration between those two countries. There's another, in terms of the South-South cooperation, the role of South-South cooperation in the institution level. One good example is that the FAO facilitated knowledge exchange on building resilience between the permanent interstate committee for drought control in Sahel and the Intergovernmental Authority on Development in Eastern Africa. So the role of FAO is to facilitate the implementation of one MOU signed between those two intergovernmental organizations. And in recent years, FAO facilitated several initiatives, including the share fair between those countries, the two regions, interregional organizations in gender and resilience, and also their study tours, and also support the documentation of good practices for those two inter-regional bodies. So what I mentioned above is only a small part of the FAO's activity in fostering resilience, but from what I introduced, you can tell FAO has already developed plenty of expertise and also the comparative advantages. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Feng, for your short intervention. I noticed here that you use the FAO for knowledge sharing. You share experience in other countries in the Caribbean. You mentioned Cuba, Haiti, and Dominican Republic, and also fostering resilience by fostering knowledge sharing and also having a comparative advantage. So thank you so much for that brief intervention. You'll have more intervention later on. Now, let me turn to my second speaker, who's sitting on my right here, Ms. Salma Shalawani. She's the Executive Manager of the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry from Sudan. My question to you is this, the same one that I addressed to the previous speaker. How does your country, your organization, the ministry, use the so-called South-Southern Triangle cooperation to address fragility and foster resilience in your country? Please, 5 minutes.
First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation to join this session. And it is my pleasure to share Sudan experience in the field of fragility and resilience in rural settings. The awareness on the issue of fragility and instability of rural societies is globally under focus and taking more attention as it deeply relates to human and food security. The role played by triangular UN organizations in agricultural sector in Sudan is significantly considered, each in its own comparative advantage area. This role could be more supported by inter and intra initiatives in the area of rural development, especially in food security and nutrition, where intents of population living there. FAO, through the European Union technical and financial assistance, is well known in Sudan for its activities in availing inputs and services to small farmers, enabling them to sustain their livelihood. The IFAD also is known by its projects in the rainfed sector, focusing on community and institutional development. Very good examples of solution on interventions of intermediate technology in post-conflict area and fragile states in Darfur, Blue Nile, and Nuba Mountain. IFAD has a prominent role in availing services, rural roads, building, and maintenance, conserving water and soil for sustainable use. Also, IFAD supported credit and business institutions, which a wide range of rural communities improved their livelihood in a very remote areas. Also, the World Food Program is known to its historical role in humanitarian assistance, plus activities that led to development in stable area, shifting from humanitarian to early recovery and development. Also, WFP played an important role in bridging the gap between farmers and markets in some part of Sudan through contribution of construction of feeder roads. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Shalawani, for your very concise and precise intervention, less than 5 minutes. Most important thing is that you outline a series of initiatives from these 3 Rome-based initiatives in your country. So if you have more questions later on, we can develop this later. Thank you so much, Ms. Shalawani. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me turn to my left. Our next panelist is Mr. Ashwani Muthu. He's the Director of Global Engagement and Multilateral Relations Division of IFAD. He's an Indian national, has extensive experience in international cooperation, agriculture and rural development, and also management and development education. He currently holds the position of director, as I mentioned early on, and he was the Deputy Director of Independent Office of Evaluation of IFAD, or IOE. So Mr. Muthu also has experience of working in more than 50 developing countries. So you can see from his maturity here in terms of going through, intervene from his point of view from IFAD. So the same question I'd like to address to you, Mr. Muthu. How does the organization, in terms of from IFAD, take into account this South-South cooperation, triangle cooperation, and also foster resilience? And we've read the documents, but if you could succinctly summarize this in your 5-minute intervention, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning to you again. So I'll do that, but before I do that, I would like to make 3 or 4 general points on working in fragile situations from an IFAD perspective. The first one, I think we'll all agree, is that fragility represents a major threat to meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. I think that is the starting point, and we all have to recognize the significance of the challenge that we have ahead of us. Related to that, I want to also mention, as you might know, that the OECD estimates that poverty will rise in fragile and conflict-affected situations, with more than 80% of the world's poorest living in fragile situations by 2030. So this actually really shows how serious the situation is and how conflict as part of fragility is also fundamental in achieving sustainable development. And as you know, I think we have to be conscious of this because it is well known and there is evidence that there cannot be any peace without development, and there cannot be any development without peace. The third general point I would like to make related to that, and bringing myself closer to IFAD's mandate, is that poor people living in rural areas, especially women, especially children and the youth, are the ones who are most affected by conflict and fragile situations. So they definitely deserve special attention in our development policies and programs. And the final general point I would like to mention is that you heard me in my remarks thus far speak about fragile situations rather than fragile states. Because at IFAD, we of course realize that there is an internationally recognized list of countries that are considered as fragile states. But at IFAD, we want to look at it slightly differently because we do realize that you can have countries that are not necessarily on that list of fragile states, which is put together by OECD and other international financial institutions, because you can have countries that are not on that list and not considered as fragile states, but have fragile situations within their boundaries. So we should not forget those situations as well. Now, what does IFAD do? And then I'll come to the final part regarding South-South cooperation. Given the significance that we allocate to building resilience, to ensuring better livelihoods of poor people in rural areas affected by fragility and conflict, we have adopted a corporate policy for working in fragile situations. So the executive board of IFAD has adopted that, and this policy guides our country strategies and our projects. The second thing I would like to highlight to you is that as an international financial institution, we provide concessional loans and grants to member countries for development projects and programs. And in order to allocate the resources, we have quite a sophisticated formula, which other international financial institutions also have, and it is known as the performance-based allocation system. So this formula of IFAD has been recently further refined to include vulnerability and fragility as a component of the formula, so that countries that have greater vulnerability and fragility are likely to get greater resources, of course, if the other components of the formula also are favorable. But it is a recognition that in allocating our resources for development interventions, that vulnerability of poor communities is high on the agenda. The third thing I want to mention to you is that in 2016, IFAD introduced a dedicated facility of $100 million known as the FARMS to precisely help people in fragile situations. It is known as FARMS, and the exact title is, it's a facility for refugees, migrants, forced displacement and rural stability, and it is particularly focused on countries in the Near East and North Africa region. And the aim of this facility, of course, is to help those people who are affected by crisis and conflict to restore their livelihoods, to contribute to their livelihood and their well-being. Last but not least, in terms of what IFAD does, before I move into the final part of my intervention, is that in the last couple of years we have been expanding our presence in our developing member states in terms of opening new country offices. And one of the criteria that we have used in determining the location of opening up new offices is particularly the fragility of the country context, because we have some evidence through an independent evaluation, which actually I led in my previous role in 2014 and 15, that when you have actual presence on the ground, performance of development projects and programs are better. Now, the final point I would like to make is about South-South cooperation and the role of IFAD. We do recognize that it is fundamental in fragile situations, in order to support countries in fragile situations, to increase exchanges of effective rural development solutions and to address both humanitarian and development challenges. IFAD, therefore, in its South-South cooperation and triangular South and triangular cooperation strategy, not only promotes technical cooperation among developing countries, but also promotes investments and links governments, businesses, and communities in fragile situations. To conclude, I also want to mention to you that we have learned that one of the drivers of success for South-South and triangular cooperation in fragile situations is precisely to address the challenges that rural populations themselves face. For example, through building climate change, adaptation, resilience, and environmental sustainability, value chain development, and promoting technological and agricultural innovations, while transforming these good practices into policies at the national level. Now, I have a number of concrete examples which I perhaps will share with you in my next intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mutu, for your illuminating intervention in terms of what IFAD do in terms of looking at the fragility, and also some concrete examples at the country level, and also the way forward. We'll have more interactions, and I'd like to encourage the audience later on to raise questions in a more interactive way. Thank you. Let's move on to the next speaker. My last speaker is Mr. Jean-Pierre de Marguerite, the Deputy Director of Policy and Program Division of the World Food Programme. Mr. Marguerite is an experienced humanitarian and development assistant. We remember in the previous session we talked about the nexus between humanitarian, development, peace, justice, transitional thing, you name it. So I'll leave it to Mr. Marguerite to explain this later. He's a professional with more than 25 years in developing countries, implementing and managing complex food assistance programs of WFP. Prior to his current position, he spent almost 15 years as a representative or country director for the World Food Programme in multiple countries across Africa and Asia. And the last experience, he was as resident coordinator for the United Nations in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. So without further ado, you have the floor, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, General Secretary Costa. I wear a suit today. I have a tie. I'm shaved. But most of my career in the UN was passed in these fragile contexts. I was there before, during, after the Rwanda genocide. I was in Banda Aceh before and after the tsunami. I was in your country, East Timor, in 1999, seeing the impact that violence, conflict, crisis can have on people, and notably on the food security and nutrition situation of population. So I've seen firsthand what my colleagues have said already, that conflict can have a devastating impact on the livelihoods and, in terms of our respective mandates here, on the food security and nutrition status of these populations. It's a key driver, and unfortunately, that driver is getting more and more impactful. You've heard the numbers that Ashwini just presented, and yourself, General Secretary, about where will most of the poor people live in some years from now. It will be in these contexts. So unfortunately, the trend is on the uprise. We've seen recently, after years of progress in reducing the number of food insecure people on the planet, now the trend has reversed. Unfortunately, the number of chronic food insecure people and acutely food insecure people is on the rise, and the main driver is conflict, is crisis, and it's the fragility of these states. So we need to address, obviously, this root cause if we want to achieve SDG, the SDGs in general, and SDG 2, which is about ending hunger, by 2030. Providing humanitarian assistance is simply not sufficient anymore. So we need to work before the crisis, during the crisis, of course, and after the crisis. General Secretary, you were emphasizing the importance of building the resilience of countries and of communities in building their capacity to better be prepared for shocks. This is essential, and it can be done through a range type of activities. At the World Food Programme, we're engaged in widening our portfolio of activities and working with communities in building their level of preparedness through Food for Work, for example, where we develop shock-responsive assets so they can be better prepared for the next shock. But also, one area where is gaining additional traction is on the social protection front. And there too, because we know that, unfortunately, it's the poor and the most vulnerable that bear the brunt of the shock when a crisis hits, we need to invest more in social protection, and notably in shock-responsive social protection. And this is where we can link and maximize the relationship between development, humanitarian, and peace, what we call the triple nexus. So it's no more a question of working in silos, but we need to expand the level of partnerships. We need to work in a more integrated fashion. And I'm very pleased to sit here with my colleagues from the Rome-based agencies, IFAD and FAO, because if there's one agenda where the Rome-based agencies are working closely together, it is very much on this front. So we're meeting very regularly. We're aware of our respective mandates. We do everything we can to leverage our comparative advantage to have the maximum impact on this agenda. So to answer your question more specifically, General Secretary, on what WFP is doing, we're working in areas such as emergency preparedness and response, early warning systems, disaster risk reduction, vulnerability analysis and mapping, needs assessment, risk insurance. And this is done through different modalities, and you've heard some of us talk about our specific activities under the South-South and Triangular Cooperation agenda. But we address some of these issues through joint missions, peer learning, knowledge sharing, joint system building, study tours, service provision, expert deployment, risk financing, and joint emergency response. Traditionally, we've seen South and Triangular Cooperation be more in the realm of development work and long-term development efforts. But today, more than ever, we see the relevance of using that approach for fragile to fragile cooperation between these respective countries. So it's an expanding agenda for us, and we'll continue investing very much time, resource, and efforts to encourage these countries to come together and share best practices, skills, and knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jean-Pierre. When I listen to your intervention, it sounds like music to my ears. And I would like to challenge my fellow G7 plus countries here to look at the 3 Rome-based agencies here. They said that they work together and then to help fragile states. So as he mentioned, in fragile to fragile context, they are prepared to invest resources and work in partnership with the government and so on. So I'd like to hear from you later on. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we now come into the second part of our second round of questions before I give the chance to the floor and some other interventions. Because you talk about fragile to fragile cooperation, Mr. Jean-Pierre, if I may ask you, starting from my left to the right, in the fragile context, how relevant is the so-called South-South cooperation in order to address hunger and malnutrition in fragile contexts? And how does WFP support it? You mentioned about it early on, but if you could elaborate a little bit further, please.
Yeah, thank you. Like I said, like we all said, we need to invest more because we realize that if we are to achieve zero hunger by 2030, we need to address what has become one of the key, if not the main, root cause of food insecurity and malnutrition. So maybe I'll give you some specific example to put a bit of tangibles behind this narrative, which can appear sometimes like being a bit too conceptual. Let me give you a few examples of tangible South and South triangular initiatives which are proven to be quite successful. In the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, the country has one of the best vulnerability and analysis mapping technology. And now we've linked the DRC with Namibia, who is in need for new technology for better real-time decision making. In Asia, there's also multiple examples. For example, in Indonesia, the country is adopting China's 72-hour rapid response methodology. Bangladesh is keen to learn from Pakistan on humanitarian response hubs. And the Philippines is sharing with a multitude number of countries what they've developed in terms of emergency preparedness. In Latin America, we've just signed an MOU with Colombia, where we will be doing joint assessment mission after emergencies and also joint responses. And maybe one more recent example, and I'll go into a bit more detail, is the collaboration currently taking place between Haiti, Dominican Republic, and Cuba. Cuba has developed a very robust system for early warning and disaster preparedness to face natural disasters, which is hitting the island practically every year. We're talking about drought, we're talking about cyclones, and hurricanes. So we've connected Cuba with Haiti and with the Dominican Republic, so experiences, best practices can be shared. And today we're very pleased that the Dominican Republic has set in place what appears to be a high-impact cash transfer program for population at risk of these natural disasters. And Haiti today has a new contingency plan mechanism that will allow population on the coast to be better prepared to face the next hurricane that is bound to hit them within the next couple of years. So some tangible examples which are really making a difference on the ground. Again, if we better prepare these population, the impact of the shock will be much less, and therefore we won't compromise the hard-won gains through years of investment into our development activities, and therefore the impact of the shock will be much less for these communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jean-Pierre, for the another excellent response. I hope the audience will capture the gist of it. Now, let me ask the second question to Mr. Mutu on similar gist. How could your organization initiate and or facilitate the so-called fragile to fragile cooperation? You mentioned in your intervention that your executive board, or if I understood correctly, has adopted that you will be investing more resources, farms, and in working in fragile situations. If you could elaborate a little bit more on IFAD's work and to facilitate this fragile to fragile cooperation, so that you can trigger the discussion later on from one of the recipient countries, if I may say, Sudan and others. Please.
Thank you very much. To answer your question, I would like to highlight the fundamental significance of partnerships. And that is really a principle of engagement for IFAD. And when I mean partnerships for addressing fragile situations and trying to support communities improve their resilience, moving from fragility to resilience, I mean, of course, partnership between the Rome-based UN agencies, FAO, WFP, and IFAD, and trying to bridge the humanitarian and development nexus. But I think also beyond that, with member states themselves, with governments themselves, but also with the international financial community, because in fragile situations, you really need also access to greater resources and investments. So that is something we do focus on, particularly when in our global policy engagement work, whether it is in the context of UN discussions in the General Assembly, in the ECOSOC, and otherwise. So that is an important aspect of what we do. So through partnerships, global engagement, to have more favorable policies, greater investments. Now, as far as IFAD itself is concerned, I think one of the greatest focus of our interventions is really institution building at the local level in countries and areas affected by fragility, in order to restore and contribute to capacity building of institutions, whether it is in terms of better security, but also in terms of technical assistance that can be provided to communities affected by fragility, and the issue of job creation. I think that's fundamental, because a lot of fragile situations and conflict are, the root cause of those are basically lack of employment leading to migration, and therefore the focus really also has to be on empowering the youth and working towards youth employment. I spoke to you yesterday about the establishment at IFAD of the Agri-Business Capital Fund, intended primarily for the youth to access resources directly from IFAD to set up small and medium enterprises. So these are some of the things that we do in order to foster cooperation and facilitate cooperation between fragile to fragile situations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I also like the word partnership, and in terms of collaboration in the context of fragile cooperation. Now, we've heard from the two Rome-based agencies here, but I will turn later on to Ms. Feng later. But I'd like to hear first from Mr. Shalwani. As a government representative here, right? Yeah. Minister for Agriculture and Forestry. Does it resonate what they were saying this? As a ministry who is dealing with the day-to-day, interaction of those initiatives. And I'd like to get a little bit more out of you. What could be the government do, or what are the ways forward in terms of addressing the fragility in your respective country, vis-a-vis the other initiatives that the three Rome-based agencies are doing in your country? Please.
Thank you again. Yes, the three organizations are working in Sudan, and they are doing well. But if they complement their effort together and have integrated approach and enhanced coordination with each other, and develop a mechanism at country level, I think the impact will be maximized and tangible. For the government efforts the government has initiative towards fragile areas in Western Sudan, focused on supporting rural services, education, health, water, building rural roads, infrastructure, and telecommunications. Also, the government policies giving priority to production, considering agriculture as the driver of the development, which will assist the fragile areas to increase their production and support their livelihood. The recent government initiative of disarmament and collection of weapons had great impact in stabilizing conflict area and maintain peace. Also, we have restructuring of the central and state governments, and it is also expected to reserve and direct resources to production sector. I think South-South cooperation with its multilateral efforts can also support through strategic partners complementing efforts of the worldwide initiatives to make use of the available potential and resources in building the institutional and human capacities in the fragile communities. Also, we cannot ignore the role of non-governmental organizations locally or internationally, and should be valued and maintained in efforts directed to stabilize those fragile areas. Thank you.
Thank you for outlining the initiatives and also the efforts by your government of Sudan in investing in western part of your country. You mentioned about certain strategic sectors, areas in health, education, water sanitation, and also infrastructure. Right, thank you. Now, second question I'd like to address to the last panelists here, and then I'll open up the discussion. To Ms. Dongxing Feng from FAO. Would it be possible for the three of you, the three Rome-based agencies, IFAD, FAO, and WFP, to develop a joint strategy to promote South-South cooperation with and in support of fragile states? And I'm sitting here as a fragile state representative. I can also would like to hear your explanation, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much again. So, in fact, my response to your question is completely positive. The three Roma-based agencies shared common interests and a common vision in terms of the implementation of the 2030 agenda, and we enjoyed a very comparative collaboration in the past years, very broad area and through different modalities, including South-South cooperation on resilience. So I just want to provide you an example. In fact, in 2015, a conceptual framework on the enhanced collaboration among those three agencies in resilience has been drafted. These documents has already been identified 4 areas, including policy dialogue, analysis and planning, and joint programming, as well as the impact monitoring and measurement for resilience. So as you're aware, to improve the collaboration among those three agencies, in fact, during the last year GSSD Expo in Turkey, the three agencies developed or launched a joint roadmap on South-South and triangular cooperation. In fact, this roadmap presents a shared action plan for enhanced collaboration in the area of South-South and triangular cooperation through outlining the working mechanism, and also to we identified the common priorities. So, in fact, after the launch of this roadmap, the South-South and triangular cooperation, these three agencies have taken action in the floor to implementation of this roadmap. For example, this year we jointly organized the events for this UN South-South Cooperation Day, and the focus of this event is focusing on South-South on climate change, which is related to resilience. So secondly, for example, just last month, in collaboration with the government of China, we jointly organized a global South-South cooperation high-level forum on South-South cooperation in agriculture, and a declaration was announced. Also, right now, the three agencies is working together in the monitoring and evaluation toolkits on South-South cooperation as well. So, apart from those, what we have done in the past time, in fact, the joint project in the country level is another very important focus for us to consider. And also, in fact, one project, in fact, has already been launched last year. So this project is a 5-year project. It was funded by the government of Canada with 50 million Canadian dollar. So this the objective of this this project is to strengthen the resilience of livelihood in the protracted crisis in the 3 countries, including Dominican Republic, DR Congo, Niger, and Somalia. So the 3 agencies is contributing respectively to this project. For example, FAO's resilience index measurement and analysis model will be used to measure the impact of the interventions to the household resilience, and also the main determinants of the resilience and how those factors evolve over the years will be analyzed. So I believe that through such joint efforts, the 3 Roma-based agencies will make contribution in terms of the fostering resilience in the fragile countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Feng. Fascinating to hear your experiences outlining all those concrete examples of the 3 base Rome agencies in the context of fragile to fragile cooperation. So thank you so much for that. Now, we have approximately half an hour left approximately, for our questions and answers. So you have plenty of time to intervene and to pose questions to our panelists. So this is your chance. But before doing that, I would like to give the floor to the three representatives. First, from UNICEF. Where are you? UNICEF? Is it somewhere here? If not, I'll give the chance later on. Okay, so, if that's the case, I'll now call upon our representative from Central African Republic, one of the most, if I may say, with a degree of confidence, fragile states. They are struggling with peace and development. But let me ask you, Bienvenue, can you, after hearing from the panelists here, the three Rome-based agencies and also another colleague from Sudan, does it resonate in Central African Republic, let's say, as in a context of fragility? And can you share some examples with the rest of the audience here? How can your country handle the fragility vis-a-vis South-South cooperation, and in particular, fragile-to-fragile cooperation? Please, if you could share with us some reflection and experience from Central African Republic. I believe you will be speaking French, right? Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Eldorf, Secretary General. I would like to it's the RCA for our interpreters. The RCA. Sorry. I am a Director of Cooperation, Multilateral Cooperation, on the focal point of G7. Plus, I have the responsibility to coordinate the following of the ODD and the Agenda 2030. I followed with a lot of interest. I don't know if concerning the panel, if the panel is following me. Can you hear me? May I continue? Buttons are pushed.
Elder.
Thank you, Elder. I understand that there's linguistic vulnerability in the room. Our panelists have become resilient, and I'm happy about it. I agree with the remarks made by the PAM, the WFP, the IFAD, and the FAO. These are the three agencies of the UN system that are very active in the Central African Republic, and I wish to thank them personally. I come from a country where we have known a crisis, a deep crisis, a security crisis, humanitarian crisis. And I must say that these agencies have contributed to work on the resilience of the population in the rural areas. So I'm going to start with the PAM that works closely with Japan in the supporting displaced populations with food, FAO, who supports through the distribution of seeds in rural areas, by the FIDA that has brought financing to the Ministry of Agriculture that helps the rural population. And yes, those agencies really work to support this cooperation. In terms of recommendations, I would like that these interventions be more coordinated so that the context of vulnerability today, when you talk about rural areas. You're talking about places where the populations, the women, the young people don't have enough roads in order to sell their products. Second point, human security. We are in situations of vulnerability where armed groups have occupied areas where there are mining resources. They kill the women, they kill the children, they kill everyone. So there needs to be a coordinated intervention on top of the humanitarian action. In terms of security, it would be necessary that those rural populations are safe, so that they can. Women need to be feel safe in order to go to the fields. So that's an aspect I wish to insist on. Second, you need to invest in education. One thing is the humanitarian emergency, but that population needs to receive education, because I heard yesterday we talked about technology, for instance. We need to go towards that transition. That rural population needs to be educated and be able to use the technology in order to profit from their potential. We know this is a young population, so this is what I wish to express. Thank you very much.
Bienvenue for expressing the or confirming the coordinated approach from the 3 Rome-based agencies in your country, and also provide some recommendations in terms of coordination and also ensuring that security is provided to the people at the rural level. This is exactly the core business of, if I may say, the G7+. We also fought for this, and having a peaceful societies at the rural level, building peaceful societies so that you can send the farmers and the kids to school, the farmers, in a very peaceful environment without war. Thank you so much, Bienvenue from Central African Republic. Because of time, I'd like to move now on to my fellow colleague, brothers here from Togo. Please, you have the floor. Similar vein, what are the examples and some of the concrete examples in South-South cooperation or fragile-to-fragile cooperation vis-a-vis the initiatives from the 3 Rome-based agencies in Togo, please. Togo is also a member of the G7+. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. I wish to thank each of the panelists for their interventions. I wish to talk about, respond to the question concerning the elaboration of a strategy for the promotion of South-South cooperation, and of course, the strengthening of resilience. You know, I see myself perfectly well what my colleague from the Central African Republic just said. Even though the situation in our countries is different, I make his declaration mine as well as his concerns. You know, I'm going to share with you, instead of responding to the question, I'm going to share with you the extraordinary Togo is living concerning South-South cooperation, and of course triangular, with the approach of working before the conflict happen. The representative of YFPA just said it's necessary to talk before, during, and after the crisis. So Togo is approaching work in that way in order to prevent crisis. We are a few weeks away from Congress elections in Togo. If everything works well, they will take place on December 20th. It's important to remember that last August 19th, our country was seriously troubled. We had some difficult days, and I will not hide this from you. For the first time in Togo, is part of the first 5 countries to host more tourists during the month of August. Isn't that strange? But what I wish to say is that within the framework of South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation, the ECOWAS mandated 3 countries, Ghana, Guinea, to help the Togolese political class to avoid a crisis and find a solution to problems. And it's not only ECOWAS. We usually call them the 5, and that means that the UNDP, the European Union, the United States, France, and Germany accompany Togo in order to avoid the crisis. So you see, cooperation, like I said yesterday, South-South cooperation is not a baby. It's a child that's already been born, that's 40 years old, and that still needs help. So I appreciate the question that the Secretary General just made concerning the strategy that the FIDA, FAO, and WFP, and I don't know your logo, you're going to explain it to me afterwards, the strategy that you have elaborated to strengthen resilience, to strengthen South-South cooperation. I chose to give you only that example, the work that is taking place now in Togo. The political class is enough supported enough by the 5th I just talked about and the ECOWAS, since there's been a problem in the sub-region. The other countries make an effort to help find the solution. That's an approach that for us that the 2 mechanisms of cooperation work well. Thank you.
Representative from Togo for your reflection and also sharing with us some of the experience from the country level. Right, ladies and gentlemen, it's now your chance. Now I give you the floor to 3 to 4 people. We have plenty of time to raise comment and question. Yes, I saw that. But could you please introduce yourself and to whom you are addressing your comment or question to, please? Yeah. Gentleman there and gentleman there, 3, 4. Okay, let me go and then we'll come back to you, madam. Please, sir. Can you please speak a bit louder, because we are having difficulty, my fellow panelists here are having. Please. Your mic sounds green. It should be red. Yeah. Right?
Technical assistant. Hello. Yeah, can you hear me right? Okay. Thank you very much for panelists that give me and Mr. Chair that give me the floor. So this is very important topic that we discussed today, and sustainable development goal is our common goal.
Excuse me. Could you please introduce yourself? Which country you from, sir?
Okay. My name Suan Vichi. I'm from Cambodian. So. I would like to address to this discussion that the SDG is very important and it's our common goal in South-South. And in South-South cooperation is we need to enhance, and it's very important to achieve SDG, that we can achieve the poverty reduction, zero hunger, environment, and other 17 goals. So we are in LEC of South-South cooperation. Our economic is depend on the agriculture. So, like Cambodian, for example, like we incorporated SDG into our national development goal, so that we work very closely with our line ministry and our development partner, for example, like IFAD, like World Food Program, like FAO, and other development partner to promote agriculture and food security, that we can ensure that zero hunger and by 2030. And food security, something like that. But the challenging is we see that agriculture is it's difficult, and people doesn't want to stay in agriculture sector. They would like to move into industry. And another, because of our challenging is because of lower price, because infrastructure, because of low productivity. So this is our challenging. And other thing that we work closely with NGO development partner, but we didn't implement the project priority one. Sometimes we work with NGO development partner, but not complement each other, but duplicate project. This is our difficult. So we can the policy that can access our recommendation, they can be seen that we should focus on PPP, producer, public, private, that we can work together that to promote agriculture or food security in the country of LDC. Another thing is supply chain, quality investment in agriculture that we needed. So, and technology, for example, like plant variety, new technology of plant variety is important because they can encourage the productivity of the country and can generate economic growth to the country. So my question to panelists, IFAD, FAO, or World Food Program, how you can use modality of other country to work with LDC of South country to identify the project that priority and not compete it with other country, but complement to promote agriculture or food security in LDC country. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Just want to remind you, because we now have less than 10 minutes now, so I just wanted to round up your questions, and then I will give the chance 1 minute each to the panelists to respond, and then we'll wrap up the session, yeah? Next one, sir, with the, yes, please, go ahead. A very quick one, please.
Obrigado. Bernardino Neto, vengo de Angola, Ministério de Economia e Planeamento.
I'm Bernardino Neto. I come from the Ministry of Economics and Planning. I have 3 questions. 2 for the panelists from the IFAD and 1 for the FAO panelist. IFAD, well, the super rich possess 82% of the world wealth. The world population doesn't have anything. Half of the world population has nothing. Thomas Piketty, a French, says in his book, Capital in the 21st Century, that now we shouldn't talk about poverty mitigation or poverty reduction, but we should talk about a reduction of wealth. What is IFAD's comment for the South-South countries? That's the first question. The second question, the reality of the South-South countries is that they have rich elites and poor citizens. How to speak about development or sustainable development and human inclusion of the South-South countries? Third question for the lady from the FAO. The world reality of agriculture is controversial. 1% of the Western population is devoted to agriculture. They have a surplus for the planet and for the animals. Africa, well, 90% of its population devotes itself to agriculture. Nevertheless, in Africa, the world starves to death. The modality helps for development. Then we have technical failures on the 21st century. What's the option for FAO? Thank you very much.
Delegate from Angola. Because of time constraint, I'll have to cut short to one question only because we don't have time. So I'll give the priority to the lady here for gender balance here. Madam, please, you have the floor. Very quick one, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is directed to IFAD. I wanted to know in all their global engagement policy, how much of the role the private sector is playing in terms of implementing their strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, madam, for your straight question. Now, let me give the chance first to IFAD because you seem to get more questions, and then I will also give the chance to other panelists 1 minute each to reflect. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, and I'll try to keep it short as well. On Mozambique, muito obrigado por a sua pergunta. Now, on the issue of inequality, because you raised the issue of inequality across countries, but also within countries, and I would like to give two responses, at least from the IFAD perspective. IFAD definitely is very concerned about inequality, and we have a very proactive and articulated strategy for inclusion of disadvantaged populations. We have a targeting policy to include poor people living in remote areas in our development interventions as a way to address the issue of inequality. But we do realize that inequality is not only an issue in rural areas, and that we also have to address urban-rural inequalities. And when we talk about rural development in IFAD, we also shouldn't forget that there is an urban-rural nexus that has to be considered. So it is something that we are very much aware of and address very proactively. Now, across countries, I think this is where South-South and triangular cooperation can be a very, very valuable instrument in addressing inequality across developing countries, those with and those who have less. Many of the middle-income countries were, decades ago, low-income countries. So using South-South and triangular cooperation, middle-income countries can, of course, through transfer of knowledge and experience and technology and technical assistance, share their development trajectory, how they moved beyond being, from being a low-income country to middle-income country. So I think South-South and triangular cooperation is quite an important instrument in addressing the issue of inequality. And finally, on the private sector, I think, and I take the liberty to speak about the wider UN system, and I stand to be corrected, and it also applies to IFAD. I think we have more to do with the private sector. I think we need to have a much more proactive engagement with the private sector, not only to mobilize the ample resources that they have, but also to mobilize their expertise. At IFAD itself, we do have a corporate private sector strategy. We are doing our best to mobilize the private sector. Just one example, and then I'll stop, Mr. Chairman. For example, we have a partnership with Mars in Indonesia, in the cocoa value chain. They provide technical assistance to small farmers in cocoa production. So we have some examples, but I don't think we are where we want to be in terms of our partnership with the private sector. And we are aware of that, and we are trying to address this as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mutu. Now, I turn to Ms. Feng, please. Go ahead, 1 minute.
Okay, so I just would like to echo the question from Cambodia. So in fact, in terms of your question, how to identify the priorities for the country in terms of South-South cooperation. In fact, what I would like to say is that, in fact, one of the features of FAO's sole-source cooperation is try to meet the demands or try to match the demands and supply. So we always work together with the project targeting country to identify the priorities from the country, and then we identify the providers so that we can match the demands and the supply. So that's my response to your question. And also, I would like to echo the PPP, the partnership on PPP. So in fact, FAO right now is mainstreaming the sole-source cooperation together with the government, state actors and the non-state actors, including private sectors. So that's the current policy in FAO to mainstream the sole-source cooperation. And my response to question from the second country is from Togo. Yeah, as you know, the FAO is a UN agency with a lot of advantage in not only in policy but also in technology, in agriculture technology. In fact, in terms of FAO's sole-source cooperation, the sole-source cooperation unit is collaborating with the other technical departments to try to identify the technologies to meet the request from the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Feng. Now I turn to Ms. Jimpuri, please.
Thank you. Quick comment also for our colleagues from Cambodia, Kampong Camp. I think I've heard that there's an increasing demand to access this information. Where are the best practices? What is appropriate for my needs? And I'm happy that FAO, who's somewhat more advanced than WFP and to some extent IFAD on this whole agenda, that I believe that together we should try to create these kind of information platform or virtual marketplace where this demand and supply can be met. We had a request earlier this week in Rome from the ambassador from Egypt asking that there be a meeting place created in Rome where providers and those that request or need some information on what is appropriate in terms of technology, skills, solutions, well, that these people have a place to meet. And I think that hopefully we'll make progress on that front. Coming back to the colleague from Togo, WFP, World Food Program, en français c'est PAM, que vous connaissez probablement. I totally agree, I think, with the complexity of these fragile contexts. You cannot address these single-handedly. I think you need an integrated approach. Okay, we've been talking, Ashwini was talking about this nexus. Initially, we were talking about the double nexus, where those working in development and those working in humanitarian needed to come together. We realized that in fragile contexts, you need that third parameter, the peace parameter. So you have this triple nexus, which is critical. And so we need to break these silos. And we need to be able to talk, discuss, and find the best integrated approach which will prove to be the most impactful in resolving these issues. But let me close by maybe doing something which is maybe improper from a protocol point of view, but Mr. Chair, maybe I would ask you a question, because we're a bunch of development experts or humanitarians here trying to find solutions that will contribute to peace outcomes and peace and security. But of course, some of the key stakeholders on this agenda are the politicians, And we've seen an extreme, complex, fragile situation. We've seen some of our principals come together and make appeals to the politicians to try to reduce the level of conflict, which was having such a damaging impact on populations. So maybe my question to you, and I know we don't have time, would be, how best do you see the role of humanitarians and development actors? How best can we influence these politicians, which are key in some of the decisions made that can lead to conflict or lead to security?
Thank you. I will also use my 1 minute prerogative right to summarize that in a minute. Madam Shalwani, you have 1 minute before we can wrap up the session, please.
My last word to my colleagues who their countries are suffering from fragilities. Our countries should work and exert more efforts in putting strategies and clear policies to develop the fragile areas and develop our countries. Thank you. More than.
That is shorter than what I expected, but thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, you have
Conclusion, vous puissiez tenter.
I want to have you in a conclusion that the FO should ask. I think it's easy to scream and for help, but how can we avoid to arrive to avoid you mentioned to intervene? What shall we do prior? I would like your conclusion to go to the answer to this question. Merci, vous m'avez fait.
Try my best, okay, as humanly as I can. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, you have witnessed illuminating interventions and presentations and also the interactive discussions from the floor. As a moderator, I don't intend to summarize everything, but let me just pinpoint 2 or 3 takeaways that I can discern from this conversation. First, there is a willpower out there. The 3 Rome-based organizations have already expressed the desire, the willingness to help developing countries in their strategy paper, in board, you name it. So they have come up with these initiatives, and you hear from the examples they mentioned. First. Secondly, no more working in silos. No one size fits all, meaning that we need to promote, enhance the coordination at the country level, partnership at the country level. And partnership, you know what? Elements constituting. To my view, I see only one word, trust. T-R-U-S-T, trust, or in Portuguese they call confiança. Without trust, you get nowhere. By having this conversation with the government officials, with the politicians, I'm now answering to you now, with the politicians, if you have trust and believe in themselves, you empower them, the politicians. I'm not the politician, by the way, but from what I interact with the politicians, this is the way to go. And I think you have more experience than you've just been humbled, not mentioning it. But by having the dialogue, open discussion with the governments, listen to them, listen to what their priorities are. This is what the New Deal for engagement in fragile states are all about. Because you're talking about fragile cooperation. We have the fragile cooperation in 4 areas now. One is on peace and reconciliation. Secondly, is on managing the elections, because elections matter in those countries. Thirdly, is about managing the natural resource management, because the countries are poor, are rich in resources. Fourth, managing the UN transition, peacekeeping forces in our countries. And most of all, importantly, is we work in partnership. That's why I'm glad that the audience mentioned about the little magic word, the PPP, private-public partnership. This is exactly what the trend is to go. So having said this, one last point from my takeaway here is that as we are implementing the Agenda 2030, in particular goal number 16, let me ask you, my fellow colleagues from South-South Triangle Cooperation, let's enhance this, promote this, and do whatever we can do in order to promote this peaceful and durable peace in our countries. And then hopefully next year we can come up more examples in the areas of peace and development in the next South-South Cooperation. With that note, I thank you very much, and please give a big round of applause to our panelists and also to ourselves. Thank you. And thank you. I would like to thank each panelist. Thank you so much.